Hey guys, welcome to the Eerie Side Podcast with your host Dee,
Sophia,
and Elena.
We appreciate you guys listening, and I hope you are ready to get on the eerie side.
Whoop whoop.
Before we get into the show, we would appreciate if you give the podcast a follow and make sure the bell notification is turned on so you'll be notified whenever we drop an episode. If you enjoy the show, we would love to have you leave us a review, and if there's a case suggestion or any feedback you'd like to share, feel free to send us a message in the text box below. Share the podcast with family, friends, coworkers, or really anyone you think will enjoy it. Please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. My story happened on July 10 of 1981 in Skidmore, Missouri. Ken Rex McElroy was shot dead in the streets in broad daylight. There were around 60 witnesses, but to this day, the crime remains unsolved. Let me tell you a little bit about Ken Rex McElroy, who was born in 1934. He was the 15th of 16 children born to a poor migrant tenant farming couple named Tony and Mabel McElroy, who had moved between Kansas and the Ozarks before settling outside of Skidmore, Missouri.
wow, 16 kids is a lot. So he's like the baby almost.
Almost, yes. He dropped out of school at the age of 15 in the 8th grade. It was believed that he was possibly largely illiterate, and at 18 years old, he was injured by a metal slab falling on him at a construction site. The incident left him with chronic pain, and some attributed his sometimes bizarre and violent behavior to a head injury as a result of the accident. He quickly established a local reputation as a hog and cattle rustler, small-time thief, and womanizer. Over the course of his life, McElroy was accused of dozens of felonies, including assault, child molestation, statutory rape, arson, animal cruelty, and burglary. For more than 2 decades, McElroy was suspected of being involved in the theft of grain, gasoline, alcohol, and antiques, but he avoided conviction when charges were brought to him 21 times. Often, other witnesses refused to testify because he allegedly intimidated them, frequently by following his targets or parking outside their homes and watching them. Often, witnesses changed their mind about testifying before trials began. If a case did make it to trial, a juror might open the mailbox to find a rattlesnake. Richard Gene McFadden was McElroy's lawyer, and he could get Ken off every time. Almost everyone, with the exception of Bo Bokenkamp, backed down. He was known as the town bully. McElroy was reported as being 270-pound giant of a man on his more than 6-foot frame.
Wow.
McElroy had thick black eyebrows and bushy sideburns, heavy-lid, wild, cold, still blue eyes, making them look half moons. A local farmer said the following: "I think that Ken simply wanted to be big and important and have people afraid of him when he walked down the street. And he got that. They were. He was as mean as he looked. He was very cunning, and he knew which people to pick on, the weak people. And he followed through on his threats just often enough to make people believe he was going to do what he said he was going to do. He had a legendary status, and it all got to be bigger than he was. Somebody would hear his name, and the legend grew bigger. When he got off on a trial, it grew even bigger. He went beyond just hammering people and being mean-spirited. He neutralized an entire criminal justice system. McElroy made a decent living by leasing the land off his farm, trading and racing dogs, as well as all the stealing he did. He was in constant trouble with the law. Livestock owners looked the other way when a few head of cattle or hogs vanished in the night, or gas barrels used to fuel farm implements were noticeably emptier. The mere mention of his surname was enough to cause anxiety, if not full terror.
Do these farmers suspect whenever their cattle or animals went missing that it was immediately McElroy?
Correct.
And so just because of that, they didn't even want to go for it because they knew his reputation.
Correct. And it was him. Because
Okay.
they're all neighbors, so they know each other in this little town. They really do.
Okay.
So they know the reputation. They know which neighbor would do it. And it was him.
So they knew
that.
right away.
Yes.
I'm sure in a town like that, everyone knows what's going on at all times just because of the talk.
Yes.
Yeah,
They
small
were-
town.
Right. They were small town. They knew it. He may have bragged about it too a little bit because it just sounds that he didn't really care because he would get away with it.
Was McElroy normal before his head injury?
I don't really know. They don't talk about it. But if you think about it, he was one of 16. They moved around a lot. By the time they actually settled in Skidmore, I don't know how much the family was known by the town.
I also wonder how maybe there was a lot on his parents' minds just having so many children too. It could have been hard to manage all of them and moving.
We're talking back in the 40s and 50s. They didn't
Understand.
have the same way of schools and health and mental health
Yeah.
and even learning disabilities or anything like that.
Right.
So I'm not sure if he had something to begin with or just the head injury did it. I have no idea. There's no mention of him, of his childhood and how he acted or was.
Well, a head injury never helps.
That's true. When they met him on the street, parents steered their children, especially their daughters, away from McElroy. It was a matter of self-preservation. Retaliation would be severe. Calling the sheriff about his threats was risk few were willing to take. Not that he would have done much good. Now, McElroy fathered 10 to 15 children. I don't know exactly how many because I see that they say more than 10, but the most I've seen is 15. So it was somewhere between 10 to 15 with different women. He met his last wife, Trina McLeod, when she was 12 years old and in 8th grade, and he was 35. He raped McLeod repeatedly. McLeod's parents initially opposed the relationship, but after McElroy burned their house and shot the family dog, they begrudgingly agreed to the marriage.
What?
Oh,
Correct.
That's
gosh.
ridiculous.
Yes. First of all, he was raping her. I don't know how they considered it a relationship. All I can think of was this girl who was 12 probably just thought it was normal, or
maybe she had feelings for him.
maybe eventually. I don't think at first.
Oh, okay, she can't consent anyways. But in her mind, was this something that she, when he came after her, that she was excited about? Was she immediately like, no, I don't want anything to do with this man?
I don't think she wanted anything to do with him because they say she was raped. I know that she was underage, but I think she was officially raped.
I don't understand why the police department just doesn't take this man.
I'll get a little bit more into it. He sidestepped it. So her parents finally agreed to it. They've lost everything at this point. She became pregnant when she was 14, dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and went to live with McElroy and his second wife, Alice.
Wait, so she's
Whoa.
That's right.
14 years old, is now pregnant, living with his second wife.
Correct. That's right. He's still married to his second wife.
Wow. And the second wife is completely aware of who she is, or
Correct. I
Wow.
think there's a lot of abuse in this household
maybe
that
like
causes
brainwashing.
fear
Yeah.
and doesn't give them the power or ability to speak up or get away.
This poor girl must have been so traumatized and depressed with this entire situation.
Yeah, I know. And then had to have to go and live with him afterward.
It's just depressing. It's devastating.
It's horrific.
Yes, and I do not know if Trena's life at home was good or bad because she did go with him and she did stay with him for a while.
I don't think she could willingly do that at her age, and given what he did to her family's home.
There's something there. I don't know. Eventually, McElroy divorced Alice and married Trena in order to escape charges of statutory rape, to which she was the only witness. 16 days after Trena gave birth, she and Alice fled to Trena's parents' house. According to the court records, McElroy tracked them down and brought them back. When Trena's parents went away, McElroy went to their home once again and he burned the house down again.
What?
And shot the McLeod's new dog.
Oh my God.
No.
Yes, this individual is just, as far as I'm concerned, he's really off the deep end.
He's controlling. He thinks he
Yeah.
deserves everything he wants.
Yes. I do not understand why the court systems and the police did not get involved, though, because, I mean, it's obviously there's a court record on this, which means
Yeah.
he never went to jail for most of this.
They're treating him like a king, and I want to know why.
Yeah, this is getting
It's
ridiculous.
unacceptable.
Now, based on Trena's story, McElroy was indicted in June of 1973 for arson, assault, and statutory rape. He was arrested, booked, arraigned, and released on $2,500 bail. Trena and her baby were placed in foster care at a home in Maryville, Missouri. McElroy sat outside the foster home for hours at a time, staring at it. He told the foster family that he would trade a girl for a girl to get his child back. Since he knew where the foster family's biological daughter went to school and what bus route she rode, additional charges were filed against McElroy.
So he basically threatened
The foster family,
an actual daughter for his daughter.
the family.
Yeah.
He threatened the family for his wife and family. Because she was underage, she was put in a foster home.
Exactly.
He wanted them back, but this was a law that was there. And it wasn't like they took away his wife and daughter on their own. Or
Right.
anything. But yes, that's how he threatened them. On July 27, 1976, Skidmore farmer Romaine Henry said that McElroy shot him twice with a shotgun after Henry challenged him for shooting weapons on Henry's property. McElroy was charged with assault with intent to kill. McElroy denied he was at the scene. As the case dragged on without a court date, Henry said McElroy had parked outside his home at least 100 times. At the trial, 2 raccoon hunters testified they were with McElroy the day of the shooting away from Henry's property. Henry was forced to admit in court under questioning by McElroy's attorney, Richard McFadden, that he had concealed his own petty criminal conviction from more than 30 years previous. McElroy was acquitted. I really don't know why it matters if the man had conviction 30 years ago. Just because he had a conviction, I don't think he was lying about McElroy. On April 25, 1980, Evelyn Summey, who worked in Ernest Bowenkamp's general store as a store clerk, would ask McElroy's 8-year-old daughter, Tanya, to return a piece of candy that she didn't pay for. Ernest Bowenkamp was 70 years old, and with his wife, Louise, they owned the store. Then Ken and his wife came into the store. Ken stood silently at the back of the store while his wife tore into Summey in an argument laced with 4-letter bombs. Evelyn tried to explain what had happened, that nobody had accused the children of stealing, and Trena said, "Why would my daughter lie?" The McElroys eventually left the store, but when Bowenkamp closed up that night, Ken was outside waiting. Refusing to argue, he and Lois went home. He showed up in the front of their house that night, and he and Trena sat there and watched them.
Wow, Trena is now becoming
Correct. Part of the problem.
Yeah, that's
In a way.
that's so sad.
We're becoming part of his style of living.
That's just sad.
It became a pattern. Once Ken even got out and fired a shotgun up in the pine tree by their house. Evelyn lived across the street, and he made sure she could see them. He'd leave, then he'd come back. Now, McElroy began stalking the Bowenkamp family and eventually threatened Bo in the back of his store with a shotgun in the hand. On July 8th, now remember these dates, okay? On July 8th of 1980, McElroy drove to the alley behind the general store. Once there, he threatened Bo Bowenkamp, who was sitting in the back of the loading dock of his store waiting for an air conditioner repairman. Ken shot the 70-year-old grocer in the neck at close range with a shotgun. A deer slug in one chamber tore through Bowenkamp's neck, coming within 3 inches of his head. Miraculously, Bo Bowenkamp survived the shot.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
From a shotgun in the neck. That's hard.
Close range, too. And it's for a deer, okay? Deer
it's
slug.
a buckshot?
Yeah, deer slug. Missouri State Highway Patrol Trooper Richard Stratton, the only lawman in the Northwest Missouri ever known to stand up to McElroy, hunted McElroy down and arrested him on attempted murder charge. He spent the night in jail before posting bond, then strolled menacingly back to the D&G Tavern and pool hall and took his usual spot.
What's interesting is that I know it didn't turn out exactly how the officer wanted, but there was one officer who was able to stand up to all of this and try to arrest him and finally stand up to him.
Right. Well, the only thing he did was arrest him,
Right.
took him to jail, and the guy came out within the next day by posting bond. So, again, nothing's really happening.
Yeah, so it's like even when they do try, there's no point to it because he has so much power and he has so much influence on everything. He can just walk free and then everyone's just giving up.
Correct. The town wondered, how is this man not in jail? Asked by many when he showed up in Skidmore the morning after his release. His preliminary trial was set for August 18th, 1980. In his usual fashion, McElroy tried to intimidate the Bowenkamp family and supporters from testifying. Bowenkamp's wife said, "You can't know how intimidating it was after that. Before his trial, he'd drive up to our house in his pickup at night and just sit there. Sometimes he would fire his gun. It was frightening." In addition, the Bowenkamps and Summy went to bed scared, woke up frightened, and lived in terror with every breath. They slept in shifts with some friend or family member keeping an eye on the street.
He's just trying to intimidate them into not testifying.
Correct. There were so many nights Bo couldn't go out and mow the yard or water the flowers because there was a truck parked down the street and they were watching the house. McElroy would just sit and glower at them, then stare at them, and they would never know what he was thinking. McElroy was known to pay local kids for information about who was where in town at a time. So the Bowenkamps had also developed their own network of informants. They delivered messages in code. For example, one of the owners of the D&G Tavern would send her young children to the grocery store for paper towels. Keeping the children innocently unaware, they were telegraphing an urgent message for the Bowenkamps to call the police. McElroy was in town and behaving belligerently. They may not see him for 3 or 4 days, and then they'd see him every day for weeks. Everyone was keeping an eye on the Bowenkamps and Summy. When they didn't know where he was, they didn't dare take the chance of not being on their guard. After McElroy fired a gun outside her house, Emily Summy appealed to Dave Dunbar, the town marshal. Dunbar talked to him, and McElroy pulled a gun on him, and he quit.
The town marshal quit?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yes, even people higher up were afraid of him.
Yeah.
She took her complaint to, at that time, was Nottoway County Sheriff Roger Kronk. He was unfazed. The sheriff said to her, "If you have to shoot him, let us know, and we'll get him before he starts stinking."
Stinking?
if they kill him before he starts smelling.
Okay.
But what I don't understand is they expect the citizens to kill him.
It's interesting because it seems like the sheriff will not care that he's dead, which I'm not surprised about considering he's just such trouble that no one's doing anything about. But if that's the case, why don't they take some form of action to either put him in prison for a while? Or it's so interesting to me that the sheriff even said that.
Yeah, it is interesting. Nevertheless, McElroy was able to delay the trial almost 5 months to June 25th, 1981. Eventually, during this time, the acting prosecutor attorney resigned, and a new prosecutor, David Baird, was assigned to the case. It was rumored that McElroy bullied the previous prosecutor to leave. Baird was only 3 years out of law school, but accomplished the impossible. He was able to convict McElroy of a crime. Granted, he was only convicted of a second-degree assault. The jury set a maximum sentence of 2 years, and the judge freed him on a $40,000 bail bond pending the appeal.
That's such special treatment.
2 years, too. That's crazy.
Now, this is because Baird lessened the charge from attempt to kill to knowingly cause serious physical injury. After McElroy was released on bond, he engaged in an ongoing harassment campaign against Bowenkamp and others who were sympathetic to the Bowenkamp, including the town's Christ of Church minister. On July 9th, 1981, he appeared at the local bar, the D&G Tavern, armed with an M1 Garanda rifle and a bayonet attached, and made graphic threats about what he would do to Bo Bowenkamp and threatened to kill him. This led to several patrons deciding to see what they could do legally to prevent McElroy from harming anyone else. On July 10th, which is now the next day, of 1981, there was a local meeting at the town's Legion Hall, just down the street from the D&G Tavern. As many as 60 residents attended, including the mayor and the Nottoway County Sheriff, Dan Estes. During the meeting, the whole topic of discussion was what they could do legally to prevent McElroy from harming anyone else. County Sheriff Dan Estes suggested a neighborhood watch, but the mindset was said perfectly by an attendee. We simply felt the system had failed us. We all knew that McElroy was like, and there he was again and again. It seemed like no one could stop him.
I feel like this is a long time coming, and I also feel like I may know the end of the story. I'm not sure.
Well,
Like you've heard of it?
Maybe or potentially not. I'll see where it ends. And
don't forget now, you have 60 people. They're all there to figure out what to do McElroy, okay? So tensions are high. And the only thing the sheriff tells them is create a neighborhood watch. If you have 60 people, they're all there to deal with a problem. And the only thing the sheriff says that I think you would think the tensions were pretty high and they feel frustrated, okay? During their meeting, McElroy arrived at the D&G Tavern with his wife, Trenna.
Oh,
Wow.
that's funny.
As he sat drinking at the bar, word got back to the men at the Legion Hall that he was in town. Sheriff Estes instructed the assembly group not to go into direct confrontation with McElroy, but instead to seriously consider forming a neighborhood watch program. Estes then drove out of town in his police cruiser. The citizens at the meeting decided to go to the tavern and messe. The bar soon filled completely. After McElroy finished his drinks, because he was not fazed that there were so many people in there for him, and they were just sitting there waiting, watching him.
Yeah, that would have been odd for him.
He didn't care. He wasn't fazed. He purchased a 6-pack of beer, left the bar, and entered his pickup truck. Upon returning to the truck, where Trenna was sitting in the passenger seat, McElroy lit a cigarette. So he definitely was not afraid of all these people around his truck. Because as he left the bar, all the people left the bar and went around his truck. Okay? He even lit his cigarette. He was telling them, hey, I'm not afraid of any of you. Trenna then reported glancing over her shoulder and saw someone point a rifle towards the back of the truck and take aim at McElroy. And then shots were fired. A couple of men hustled Trina to a nearby bank away from the gunfire. McElroy was shot at several times, but hit only twice. Once by a center fire rifle and once by a .22 rimfire rifle. In all, there were at least 46, probably more, but at least 46 potential witnesses to the shooting, including Trina McElroy. When the shooting ended, McElroy was slumped over the steering wheel, and everyone just went home. Nobody called for an ambulance. When Estes and the state troopers arrived back in town, the streets were empty and quiet, except for the rumbling, smoking engine of McElroy's truck. His foot had fallen on the accelerator when he was shot, causing the engine to run at full bore. No one bothered to turn it off.
Can I ask you, where is Trina in all of this?
The only thing I know is she was taken away at the shooting, and I don't even think she went back because no one called for an ambulance.
I wonder if she decided to give up or if the community members did something to prevent her from doing it.
I don't know if the community members prevented her from going back or she decided it was too toxic for her to go back and dangerous because it was a mob and she just decided not to get involved.
Some people do make that decision, and that's very possible.
I don't know because I was wondering. I don't know what she said. I'll get into it, but she was in court, but it was kept quiet. The records were private. They're not out there. It had been said that the attitude of some townspeople were he needed killing. To this day, the person who shot Ken McElroy remains unknown. Yet in a conspiracy of silence that has spanned in the past 43 years, the townsfolk have kept the secret close. It's really interesting. When a couple people create a crime, it's hard to keep all of them quiet. A whole town has kept quiet on this.
It's the community has bonded together.
They
over
have.
this.
Yes.
It's kind of crazy to think about it.
Yeah, I have heard of this, but not to the detail that you did, I think. And so this is really interesting to hear the whole story in detail. And wow, I don't know if a community has ever bonded to the level that this community did.
At least not like as maybe it's a traumatic one. I'm not honestly sure.
Something about like we have to protect each other, like we have to protect the tribe, because I think all of their lives were at risk or at stake because he was dangerous.
I completely agree, but it's like a conspiracy theory, a whole town conspiracy theory, which is crazy because you never assume certain conspiracy theories can one run this deep and two be proven, but it is when you think about it.
Yes, you need to remember that what created this whole thing is fear. Fear of their lives. So I think that's why. This is how they thought. The town said the following: we stood up and did the right thing. We went to the police. We went to the courts. Mm-hmm. We went everywhere we could, but justice would just stay delicately out of the way. The justice system had as much to do with the killing of Ken McElroy as anyone in Skidmore did.
They're right to say that because I don't know of any other story or situation where an individual like that, who is not even politically connected to my knowledge or isn't even such a high level figure, he seems like just an everyday kind of person. I've never heard a story like this where the justice system has completely failed to do anything, which is, I think, why we've never seen, to my knowledge, another situation like what the town did and they banded together to solve this.
Well, they did solve their problem.
Yeah.
You know?
They definitely did it in an interesting way.
McElroy was buried at the Memorial Park Cemetery in St. Joseph, Missouri. Only Trina claimed to identify a gunman. Every other witness was either unable to name an assailant
I love that,
or claimed not to have seen who fired the fatal shots.
I wonder why.
McElroy's widow said she told a county grand jury who murdered her husband. Still, the panel didn't return an indictment, giving rise to conspiracy theories about a law enforcement cover-up. The DA declined to press charges. The FBI entered the case. Investigators dug and dug, but Skidmore residents maintained their silence. A federal jury was convened. Again, there were no indictments, and McElroy murder case was tossed back to the DA. The guns were never recovered. Many wondered why didn't the DA press charges against the men Trina McElroy fingered as her husband's killer. The former prosecutor said, we didn't have sufficient evidence to go to trial. They can't go to trial with one witness when there was at least 40-some witnesses there.
Right.
Yeah.
That's definitely a big loophole that an attorney is going to point out.
Correct. There were witnesses. It really is that it was never spoken of. They had an instinctive reaction to close up. A lot of them didn't even tell their wives and children. They just went stone silent.
They were definitely protecting everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They were protecting themselves and the town and their families.
You don't even see communities bond like that. And maybe they had a reason to, but that's definitely very unique.
It was. Skidmore townsfolk may not have liked how he was killed. It was murder after all. But when he died, most of the town's 435 residents left out a heavy sigh of relief. They could finally sleep peacefully at night, especially Bo and Lois Bowenkamp and their children, and some actually also. On July 9th, 1984, Trina McElroy filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Skidmore, county of Nottoway, Sheriff Danny Estes, Steve Peters, mayor of Skidmore, and Dale Clement, whom Trina accused of being the shooter, but who was never charged. The case was later settled out of court by the parties for $17,600, with no one admitting guilt for the stated reason of avoiding costly legal fees could the suit proceed. Trina remarried and moved to Lebanon, Missouri, where she died of cancer on her 55th birthday on January 24th, 2012.
Wow. That's 2012. So how many years was that from all of this?
From when she died?
Yeah.
She died 12 years ago.
No, from when the murder happened.
Yeah.
The murder, when he died in the murder,
Yeah.
What year was he murdered?
he was murdered 1981, I thought.
Okay. So
Okay.
she spent a lot of, it was a
81,
lot. So she
yeah.
died a while after. Okay.
I wonder why they didn't hide from Trina who the murderer was.
I think it was a reaction. I don't think, from what I was reading, the people did not get together that day to discuss how to kill him.
Okay.
So what happened was, in that meeting, I think emotions were high. They were frustrated. No one had a solution that would work. When they heard he was there, they all went out, and I think whoever decided to do it just did it, and the rest of the town said, you know what?
I
We'll just
could
cover
see
it
that
up.
happening that way.
I don't think they got together and said, okay, you're going to shoot him and we're not going to. No, I think it was people were frustrated. And if that gentleman was the one who shot him, if he didn't, I think someone else would have. I just think that's how high the emotions were that day.
They
Like
were just
someone
fed
was
up.
going to do it one way or another.
And don't forget, they're farmers. They have their guns with them.
True.
And they have been able to keep their patience and do everything correctly. And then this happened to them.
Well, and I think also being farmers, and it's 1981, I'm sure there was an attitude of, okay, we have trusted law enforcement for too long and it has failed us, and something's got to give for them probably.
Correct. And I think the legal team did try to find out who it was. But once they realized that everybody was shutting up, I think they just said, forget this, we're not going to go. Now, the FBI came. And from what I read, they were pushing people to admit to it and say who did it and confess. No one did. They said FBI pushed people so much and no one confessed.
Wow.
No
That's
one.
crazy. Statistically, I just feel like it would just be very possible that someone
Right.
would eventually confess, but that's just crazy that the whole town didn't.
It's hard to think that that's even possible for somebody not to break.
Because I just figured someone would have said
I'm
something.
also outraged and disappointed that law enforcement put so much effort to finding his killer when
they
he committed so many crimes and they did nothing. Like, if they had put that same effort to stopping his behavior and his crimes,
I think that they still have to, regardless of who the person was.
If that's
it is
true.
their
Why
job.
didn't they do that for every time McElroy?
I don't think that
committed-
at least for the FBI they weren't called in.
not the FBI, but the other.
No, but
justice.
I'm just saying as to why they were investigating. It was
not
their
the
job.
FBI, but it just seems like they were really trying to figure out who murdered him, and it's like, why weren't you there when you needed to solve all the crimes?
Well, the police I know are part of the corruption.
The priests were not part of what corruption?
The police were turning a blind eye too.
Correct. But I also think they may have been fearful
Right.
with him too. I think that is why probably they didn't care as much. I think the FBI did come in to solve the problem. They were pressured so much. People were saying the FBI really pressured them. What is the FBI going to do? They're all adult men probably. They've seen a lot. They feel threatened. And I think they just said, where were you when we needed you? I think inside them. I don't think they said it to them. And that's what kept them all stay. I don't even think they had this situation where everybody said, okay, don't say anything. I think they all knew not to say a word.
it was understood.
Yeah, it was so well understood.
I wonder if because the crimes McElroy was committing was not something like murder that could put him away for a while, that people didn't want to get involved because they knew he would only put in so much time and then he'd be back out and he could start harassing them and potentially hurting them.
I think everybody did not want to deal with him. Bowenkamp almost died. I mean, if you think about it. And what did he get? He was going to get 2 years in jail for it.
Yeah.
What to think about that Trina submitted that lawsuit and to remember that once Trina was that 14-year-old girl who was
12, actually, when
12.
she was abused,
Yeah, 12.
started. Yeah.
she was raped
Yeah.
and in some ways kidnapped into being his
Wife.
child bride.
Right.
I mean, it's really sad to see her life and outcome.
I personally have been thinking about Trina, and I think that she was so abused. She didn't really understand how to get away or what to do.
Yeah.
And she did stand up and say, okay, I think he's the one who killed my husband. I think the money was to help her because I don't think she had much after he died. And I've thought of this, and I think this might have been good for his daughter since he was known to go after young girls.
True.
And you don't know if that was also something that he would do with his own daughter. You
He was
have
a
no
terrible
idea.
person. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Trina, if you really think about it, how long would he keep her? Because he seems to like them young. And let's see, he had his daughter when he was 14 and she was 8. She's only 22. If you think
Yeah.
about it.
That's
She's really young. Trina is probably just maturing at this point. I know women mature a little faster, but still,
Yeah.
if you think about it, she's gone through abuse and trauma.
Yeah.
Definitely a unique story that I
Yeah.
don't think we're going to see something like this probably ever again.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Nowadays, with people carrying guns all the time in some states, I wonder.
I think it could be hard though with social media and everybody has their phones out.
Nowadays, everything. The second someone thinks something's going on, they all whip out their phones.
And I think communities are not as connected as they were back then.
Definitely not. Unless you're going to like a rural farming community, maybe.
That's probably
Correct.
the best chance of finding something similar.
Which is what they had in this case.
Yeah.
Well, I also think that his brain injury may have made things worse.
Well, I 100%. I mean, I don't know. He may have been a bad person before, but this definitely would have accelerated his brain issues and his aggression.
Right. I mean, he had a lot of issues here. Anyone who's spent so much time sitting outside a neighbor's house, why don't you just stay with your kids? Why waste your time?
But that was still after the head injury, right?
Yes, because his head injury started when he was 18.
Yes.
A lot of this started afterwards.
Okay.
He definitely
Interesting.
had some sort of control issues. Something was going on.
Yes, he did. I want to thank you all for listening to us this week. We love our listeners, and because of you, we do this podcast. Your help and engagement really helps the podcast grow. If you enjoyed this episode, please text a friend and family member to listen to our podcast. Until next time, make sure you stay on the eerie side. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Be safe.